in running the session today. Oh, here we go. We're just kicking in live now. So welcome along to the Smash event, everybody. My name's Wade Bell. I'm part of the Smash committee and on the trust. And it's a real pleasure today to be part of this conversation with Dave Swney. Some of you will know Dave, local farmer in the Waikato here, and Jair, who's part of the LIC Reproductive Solutions Advisory Team. I'm going to get those guys to introduce themselves a little bit briefly in a moment, but before I do so, just want to recognise the sponsors. They're an important part of the Smash funding group to make sure that these events can happen. So Dairy NZ play a big part in that. So too Balance, Pioneer, Rabobank, LIC and FMG. So a big shout out to those organisations that do help fund the Smash organisation. So look, we're going to kick into this, but I'll quickly hand over to you, perhaps first, Jair, just to introduce yourself and your role with LIC.
Cool. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Jair. Like Wade said, I work for LIC, and I am a reproduction solutions advisor there, which I guess it makes us part of my role really is to support our sales team and also to help, I guess, promote reproductive performance throughout the country and look at national statistics and trends and all sorts of things, data that you can think of from a reproductive performance point of view.
Cool. Thanks, Joy. And we're going to really rip into that because I'm sure farmers, particularly in the north, are going to be pretty interested in
yes.
In what's going on in that space. And Dave, you've done this a few times before, mate, but people have probably seen you online a few times before too. But do you want to just tell us where you farm and a little bit about your farm system, because we're going to get into that a little bit later as well.
Yeah. Look, welcome along, everyone. Myself and Alice, we in equity partnership, milking 400 cows with my parents, just 10 minutes south of Te Awamutu. We run a system 5, try and keep it pretty basic system 5, just maize and PK predominantly, with some winter grazing. We calve our heifers 1st of July and plan starter calving for our cows 10th of July. So pretty early farm, rolling contour and ash soil.
Yeah,
so
cool.
Yeah, and just run a once a day herd all year round as well.
Oh yeah, well we might get into that a little bit later. See how the performance of the once a day herd has gone. And look, I do want to actually say before we kick into it, Dave, I guess really appreciate you putting your numbers up. You know, I kind of recognise that from a farmer's point of view. Sometimes putting your repro numbers out there, you know, it's always one of those things that farmers feel incredibly proud of. And so when it doesn't go quite according to plan, you know, it can be a bit nerve-wracking kind of throwing your numbers out there for everybody to see. So, but it'll be a good discussion, I'm sure. Look, before I kick back to you, Joy, just to give us a bit of the painting the picture, just want to remind people that you can fire some questions up in the comments. So we'll keep a bit of a watch on the comments section. So if you've got a question, feel free to fire one up or rip into it, and I'll try and stop it along the way and make sure that we cover those. So Joy, just coming back to you, you've given me a few slides here. I'll pop one or two of them up on screen, but do you want to give us a little bit of an overview in terms of, you know, how the season has gone relative to previous, you know, from a national and regional perspective? So
sure. No, that's all good. I guess the season just gone is a tale of two halves, really, the North Island half and the South Island half. So what you can see in the data there, the slide is the 6-week in calf rate, both nationally in blue and for the Waikato region in red. So from a national point of view, we had a decrease of about 1% 6-week in calf rate. And for the Waikato, the drop was around 2.5-3%. So That's quite a bit. I guess we were already a little bit concerned earlier on when the submission rates start to come in the early part of the mating season, in the North Island specifically. We were seeing submission rates being 2-3% behind from the previous season, and what we were hearing from farmers is that in vets in the industry was that there was a lot more intervention being done as well. So we had more cows being intervened with and lower submission rates. So that on itself was a big red flag for us, thinking about what would unfold from a reproductive performance point of view. And it wasn't until the South Island kicked in and the numbers from the South Island came up that the national average sort of steady up the ship a little bit. But big regions like big dairy, strong dairy regions like the Waikato and Taranaki had significant drops in 6-week in calf rate. And as you can see from the graph, it doesn't change a lot from year to year. In general, it's a very steady sort of 6-week in calf rate is a measure that doesn't change a lot from year to year. So to see the level of change that happened in the Waikato this season and the Taranaki as well was quite alarming to some extent.
Yeah, so that's a really statistically significant drop, isn't it? You know, when you get those small variations, you know, pretty hard to pinpoint, but yeah. That's quite a marked change.
It was a marked change,
yeah. And so and then flowing through to obviously the next bit is the not in calf rate. So if we maybe put the summary up there.
Cool. So we I guess we work out of the premise that if for every 2% increase or decrease in 6-week in calf rate, you're going to have a decrease or an increase in not in calf rate. So what we're seeing here is that especially from the 2021 to 2022 season, there was an increase in not in calf rate of about 1.5% in the Waikato, and nationally 0.5% higher not in calf rate compared to 2021.
Yeah. So is this a little bit symptomatic, Joy, of, you know, we're seeing kind of farmers generally trying to tighten up their mating period, you know, so we're, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a reduction.
That's a really good question. Period. And the national average mating length based on the statistics that we have. So just to give you some context, the numbers that we're looking at from a national data point of view represent about 4,600 herds, which represents about 2.4 million cows. So the mating length hasn't changed significantly in the last 3 or 4 seasons. It's about 10.6, 10.7 weeks all up. So that hasn't changed a lot, which is also an important consideration when you're comparing not in calf rates, is that if you do have a significant change on mating length, that will have a big impact on the not in calf rate itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about, do you see any trends in the change in the practices, bulls versus all AB, for example, because that's another practice that's kind of changed a little bit. And does that influence any of the numbers or not really?
Yeah, no, good question. This year specific, I guess, not this year, the last couple of seasons, 2 or 3 seasons, really, with the increased usage of wearables, farmers have, one of the farmers that do use wearables have tended to go all AB. And when I look at the data for this season, I see that farmers that do all AB have a slightly higher 6-week in calf rate, but they get to the same not in calf rate in about the same amount of mating length. It's slightly longer for all AB herds, but about the same not in calf rate.
Right. Okay. So it doesn't influence this, but it does influence maybe that 6 week. Is that right?
I guess because the average AB mating length in New Zealand is about 6 weeks. So between the herds that do, I guess so the vast majority of herds that don't do all AB, they do about 6 weeks of mating anyway. So I wouldn't think that the all AB impacts 6 week in calf rate, but it will have. I guess you. If it was to have an effect, it would be on not in calf rate. Yeah,
right. Yep. And just to finish, you did have a little bit of additional info there about the kind of I guess the breakdown.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yes.
I guess it's we always with the work that we do, we're always trying to provide insights that's based on the age ingredients that influence reproductive performance as per the INCAF principles, and one of the big players is calving pattern. So this data that we're looking at here is based on the 2021 the statistics. We don't have the 2022 statistics. It will the final data set will be this coming weekend, so then we'll have it. But I guess that the key message here is that it sort of it shows what we already know, that earlier calving cows have higher 6-week in calf rate, and the later the later the cow calves, the lower the 6-week in calf rate is. And and this data also shows, when we look at not in calf rate, is that to have a lower not in calf rate, you have to have a 6-week in calf rate. So the higher 6-week in calf rate of the calving groups, the lower the not in calf rate is, with very late calving cows, which are not a high proportion of the herd, but very late calving cows, we're talking about cows that calve within three weeks of the mating start date. They have a very low 6-week in calf rate and a very high not in calf rate. Big attrition number there. Yeah.
And we'll see some of that not in calf rate relative to 6-week in calf rate on Dave's fertility focus report when we chuck that up as well.
Yeah.
And probably just to finish off the age group performance, just for some additional context.
Yeah, that's cool. So it's always something that comes up, sort of like, especially I hear a lot of farmers telling me that younger cows are harder to get in calf. But when we look at the national data, what we see is that 2-year-olds get in calf better than 3-year-olds, which are better than 4 to 8s, and the 9+, the older cows tend to be a wee way off the rest of the herd. And that goes, the younger cows have higher 6-week in calf rate and lower not in calf rate compared to the older age groups. And to note, again, the 9-year-old pluses, they are a bit like the very late calving cows. There's a group of cows that has low 6-week in calf rate and a very high not in calf rate comparatively.
Yeah. Yep. So just coming back a bit before we jump to you, and Dave, you can jump in here as well. Coming back here to the 6-week in calf rate. Have you got some initial thoughts or some thinking around, what might have caused that drop? That's significant, right?
It is significant.
What are the drivers behind that?
My take on this is we had especially in the North Island, we had a pretty tough season, pretty tough spring. So I believe a lot of this drop in reproductive performance has to do with an energy balance deficit that farmers experienced, especially because we're thinking about when we're trying to get cows in calf is when cows are actually reaching big milk performance sort of thing. And also what we hear from the processors is that production was behind in the earlier part in that part of the season. So cows were producing less. They were then, because they produced less, they also are showing less signs of reproductive performance, age, heat, and so on. So there is a compromise on all of that was coming through, I think, through the season.
Yeah, Dave, have you got any thoughts on that? We'll swing you in here, mate. What are you?
Yeah, I think looking back on last mating, it was pretty tough. Like we all know how wet the whole season's actually been, and it started right back at calving. And the rain, it feels like just hasn't stopped. So, I do remember things being pretty tough back then, through that later calving piece and into mating. And I guess that's all just part of that whole stress cycle. There's more stresses on cows at that time of year. And for our own system in particular, we had a lot of area coming out for crop and that sort of thing, putting a bit of pressure on feed and that all at the same time as well. So, I think just a lot of pressures all at once was a bit of a perfect storm.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there, Dave. Interesting, Joy. I did just did a bit of prep for this. I looked back on some data, just even looking at the dry matter percentage of pasture in the over the mating period, and it was about 1 to 2% lower than the previous year. So you kind of think about feed allocation. And if a farmer's, allocating a certain amount of pasture, that's the equivalent of sort of 1 to 2 kilograms of dry matter difference in intake for the same visual allocation of feed, and so you start to wonder whether, some of those play into, I never like to pinpoint, kind of one possible reason, but I'm sure it was a contributing factor to perhaps what was going on around energy balance at that time.
Yeah, and just one more thing that it just occurred to me is also, I think one thing that happened also in 2021, farmers did milk cows a bit longer. So I don't have the data, but if farmers are milking cows longer, chances of them meeting body condition score targets at calving are lower. So that they usually don't go hand in hand. So and that's also something that to be mindful this season as well, because we have so much grass, where we have comparatively a lot of grass compared to previous seasons. The farmers may be tempted to keep milking cows, but if the cows don't get to body condition score targets, there's a chance the next year reproductive performance will also be compromised.
No, that's a valid point, and Frank's just put up a point there in the comments about body condition score targets. That difficulty in hitting those targets coming off the back of a tough summer, autumn, and farmers potentially milking on too long. I think the issue this year is that, like you say, Joe, we've got a high proportion of the cow's diet being essentially autumn pasture, and cows obviously feeding that, and it's a lot harder to put that condition on. So if you're milking on a little bit longer, you're also going to overlap the fact that it's going to take longer to put condition on those cows as well.
Absolutely,
yeah. We're going to get, there was a question put on there about some of the key targets. We might capture some of those points and key targets when we actually look at your stuff, Dave. So I'm going to swing to you. I'm going to try and just do this on the fly here a little bit. So hopefully people will bear with me for a moment while we just put your what are we best to start with here, Dave? Do you want to start with your 22 spring result?
I guess I could just give a brief sort of overview of my mating first, and then get into some of the numbers. So
cool.
So like I said earlier, we calve our heifers a couple of weeks earlier than our cows, just to try and give them a little bit more time to recover from calving. This latest mating period, I guess, like a lot of people, were quite disappointed with the result. We do feel like we throw the kitchen sink at it a little bit. From calving through to that mating period. Every cow gets once a day milked for a minimum of 1 to 2 weeks post calving, just to make sure we're in the right shape before mating. We're really happy with how we transitioned from calving, as we can sort of see in that fertility focus report too as we go through it. Calving spread was really good, both for the mixed age herd and the young cows. We had every cow calved, every single cow a month before mating this year. So I was quite excited for mating until
it was lining up pretty good.
Yeah. And then we started getting cows returning and can kind of see the wheels falling off before our eyes, but quite hard to change at the time. So we, like I said, we have that herd on once a day. We do pre-mating heats, pre-mating as well. We used about half a dozen seeders this year. And then any of those non-cyclers go into the once a day herd as well. And then we do all AB, normally meant to be 10 weeks, but because I could see things weren't going so well, we stretched that out to just over 11 weeks mating.
So you went a fraction longer than the previous year, but and maybe I'll just quickly bring up the previous year, because I think that is important. I'll just bring that up. Again, some pretty spectacular calving pattern, submission rate, heat detection results the previous year as well. and probably a 6-week in calf rate that you were okay with. Always room for improvement, but and same with your not in calf rate from the previous year, but
and I
quite
guess,
a different.
Yeah, I guess with that, but historically we used to be up around that 74% 6-week in calf rate, and sort of anywhere between sort of 10 and 15-16% empty rate based on a 9 to 10 week mating.
Yeah.
I guess the previous mating we'd actually had a few issues with some semen as well, which didn't help our cause with the 6-week in calf rate, or I guess the conception rate. This year, I guess that the big outlier there is that conception rate on our fertility focus report.
Yep, just up here. Hopefully, Bill can see it. Yep.
Yeah, and being a farmer, a lot of us will point the finger a lot of the times with the conception rate at the technicians, but we're confident we can rule that one out.
Yeah.
So I guess it was just about trying to dive a little bit deeper as to why, we had these cows set up really well, but we just couldn't get them to hold, and that's been the head scratcher ever since. Trying to figure that one out, and I guess hence why we're here today.
Yeah, cool. So back to you on this one, Joy. Yeah, I know you've been working with Dave on this one, and I to be fair, it's a head scratcher to all of us, because that just looks like the management leading up to, or even from the previous year calving pattern, everything's kind of, the boxes are being ticked.
Yeah.
Yet we've kind of got this, certainly an undesirable conception rate.
Absolutely.
Eddie, when you dug into it, and I know you and Dave have had this conversation, were there any things that kind of came out of that conversation?
Good question. Yeah, this was it's definitely, I have to agree, that's a head scratcher, because when you look at this report, everything up to the 3rd week of mating, from so getting pre-mating heats at 73%. That's if you're looking at that sort of 75% of the cow should be cycling 10 days before mating start date type of thing. And having a 93-99% submission rate, 3-week submission rate for the herd and heifers, you would have thought that everything would have been fine. But as you say, once we were looking at conception rates, what we could see was that especially the first 3 weeks of mating, and then the subsequent, which is an unusual thing, that the conception rates were low in the big all throughout. It was very consistent throughout the weeks. And what we usually see in normal seasons is that the first 3 weeks you usually have a better conception rate, and then as the weeks go by, it decreases. So there wasn't anything really jumping at us from that point of view. We could see that the early calvers in his herd didn't perform as well as perhaps they should. And then when we looked at different age group performance, the 3-year-olds were running a 70% 6-week in calf rate and 16% on calf rate. 2-year-olds are 68, which is a little bit lower. And one thing that Dave and I talked at length about was the percentage of older cows in his herd, and those cows had a poorer performance. So he to weigh them out of that performance, the other age groups needed to be performing at a much higher level, which they didn't this year.
Yeah.
So not really. I don't have a straight answer for that.
Well, in some respects, this is good, right? Because there will be farmers in the same boat as this that are probably scratching their heads a bit too. And again, this is what I congratulate you, Dave, for putting it out there, because it's the whole reproductive thing is, there's an element of really, well-known, well-researched management factors, and then there's kind of a little bit of an unknown, or like we said, a head scratcher around what's going on. Dave, just before I come back to you, so George has just put up there about where your cows peaked at. Do you want to just talk us through, what cows were doing over that period, and kind of how they were being fed? Because we mentioned earlier around, that feeding and impact of seasonal weather conditions at the time, cow conditions part of the story.
Yeah.
Do you want to paint the picture there?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess being a System 5 herd, we do have some high producing cows in that twice a day herd, and just remember we run a twice a day, once a day system here. So those heifers and younger cows and anything that might have been struggling earlier on in the season, we're on once a day. So through our herd tests, our twice a day herd at the time of mating was sort of peaking around 2.5, and our young herd, from memory, they must have been around that sort of 2 solids to 2.1 to give us a bit of an average, closer to just over 2.2. So we have been quite amazed with how well our once a day herd have still been producing under a once a day system, I guess. However, quite disappointed again with the repro results, with having that herd on once a day, because we sort of accept taking a bit of a knock on that production for those young cows to hopefully gain it in repro. This year, that sort of didn't really work out for one reason or the other.
Has it done in the past? Has that worked?
Yes, it has. In the past, it has worked really well. I remember, would have 1 or 2 heifers come up empty out of the lot. This year, it was closer to 10 to 15% of those young cows. So something wasn't quite right there, and it's one of those things that's really hard to pinpoint, as we've discussed and prove. But there's a number of things we're going to look into going into the new season, just around feeding, making sure we have the right mix of feed going in at that time. Obviously weather we can't control, but then everyone deals with the same weather, in your area. But we've also going to look into that age profile a little bit, which we haven't discussed too much yet. But we do have a few older cows in the herd that have let us down a little bit, but I guess they're still not the core reason for the poorer result. But I guess that is a bit of a take-home message for me going forward, is just to probably rear a few more young stock to give us a few more options as we go through the years. Really, I guess just looking at that crucial period around mating and what we're feeding and what we're doing. Typically, we're a maize sort of PK molasses diet and grass through that period. There is quite a bit of stress on our system with taking out 16% of our area in crop, and I just wonder how much that's impacting on intakes and that as well. At the time, so we are reducing our crop area for next year too, just to take the pressure off that period a little bit as well.
So you've touched on it a little bit there. So how big a part is, if you think of, and this is perhaps to both you and Jair, genetics is a and I guess further to genetics, age structure, all sorts of stuff, components are part of the long run kind of reproductive performance. What's been the history, Dave, in terms of your culling criteria, the selection of animals, the breeding objectives, and Jair, for you to come in afterwards, like what sort of influence does that have? Does genetics have in the long run as well?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, we did winter milk for a few years, so carrying over a few cows. Primarily, that was because we started rearing our calves at home for their first 12 months. And so because of that, because we're carrying cows over, we didn't rear as many young stock. So I feel like we've hit this point, like I said earlier, a bit of a perfect storm where we've had less young stock coming in. We've been culling for other reasons within the herd rather than age. And I think the combination of doing the fewer replacements and the winter milking has allowed that age structure to get a bit older than what we would like. So I guess that's been a little bit of the history around it. So we're really trying to rein that in a bit at the moment, rearing a few more replacements and trying get a bit heavier on the culling around age and performance.
Yeah. Jair, do you have a comment there around that history with Dave and just genetics in general and
genetics in general? I guess when we look at the national data and we sort of divide herds and quartiles of breeding worth BW and look at the reproductive performance, what we see is that the top 3 quartiles tend to be very similar in terms of reproductive performance, but once you get to the bottom quartile of breeding worth, you get a lower 6-week in calf rate and a higher not in calf rate. That's kind of when we look at production indexes like LW and PW, we see similar thing. The top 3 quartiles, very similar performance, and the bottom quartile guys being worse in terms of reproductive performance. And then there is the impact of fertility breeding value that we look at too. When we look at that from a national point of view, the top quartile cows and fertility breeding value have slightly better reproductive performance than the second quartile, which is better than the third quartile, and the bottom quartile tends to be the worst. And what usually happens is that the lower the 6-week in calf rate of the herd, the bigger the gap between the top quartile and bottom quartile fertility breeding value is. Herds that have high 6-week in calf rate in general have the top and bottom quartile gap in 6-week in calf rate very, very, very small. So they get better reproductive performance of poorer genetics animals as they do. So I guess the key message there is that when we look at herds that are in the top quartile of 6-week in calf rate, the average fertility breeding value is only a 0.1 kind of higher than the other quartile. So that they do drop a little bit, but it's very little, which would suggest that based on fertility alone, the difference in 6-week in calf rate should be, 1 to 5%, and the range between the top and bottom quartile is 20. So it's not necessarily the genetics of the cows that's causing the trouble there.
And to that point, I see George and Matt are going, but hell for leather here on the questions. Dave, hopefully you've been spotting these days. BW, PW, the herd. What is the? No, actually, it might be on the report here further up. Is it? Maybe no.
I just had a quick look because I saw that question pop up to see what it is. It is been changing a little bit, but BW 213 and PW 273 for the herd. And in terms of the diet and the mix, yes, we have used a nutritionist in the past, and we have worked closely with Sue Mackey in the past. She's now retired. But yeah, look, I guess that is an area that we are looking at. It's not an area that is going to be the same for everyone, I guess, out there. But I guess with our herd, with the higher producing cows, it doesn't take much to tip them over. And I guess, like we sort of keep coming back to, I do just feel like it was a bit of a perfect storm at the time, and maybe we just didn't get that feeding right for one reason or the other. But I would say that that's only contributing to the problem. And there's, we've still got to sort of try and dive a little bit deeper into the reasons for it.
Yeah, and I think probably in fairness to you, Dave, the reason that you're looking at some of those elements like that is because of these numbers here. You've kind of nailed a number of these other management factors and going, okay. And then you've drilled into the real specific details. So the structure of the herd, how various age groups are performing. You've really dissected the whole thing in detail first before you kind of jump to, hey, look, this is kind of an area that we think we could perhaps look into a little further. So it wasn't. What I'm saying is, it probably wasn't the first thing that crossed your mind, maybe.
No, definitely. But it's it's a valid point, and I think your point earlier about the dry matter percentages being down, sunlight hours, all that stuff contributes. we did feel our cows were in fairly good nick, heading into mating, especially with the once a day system that we run post calving. But so yeah, it is just one of those hard things.
Yeah. So Jair, I guess what Dave's experienced, lots of farmers, are you fielding a lot of, are you having a lot of conversations with farmers about I know everyone's Food Focus report's going to look a lot different, and you mentioned right at the outset you could almost see some of this coming with poorer submission rate
rates.
result. Yeah. So there was some management stuff at play, which is perhaps a little bit different to Dave's situation. Are you having more conversations with farmers, and what are the things that you would encourage farmers to be doing, when they're getting their kind of repro results? Can they extract more information out of you?
Yeah, good question. That's a very good question. I guess I am of the opinion that if you record good data, then you can try and find areas of opportunity based on the information that you get out of that data. So I'll definitely be encouraging them to looking into the reports that I mind around Repro, and looking at the different groups, the influence calving pattern as reproductive performance, age group. If they record body condition score, they can have a look at that, and if they record any more health events, they can also see the impact that some of those health events have in reproductive performance. But I guess the big thing that keeps coming to my mind is being mindful, and I guess the big question then is what can you do? But as the INCAF book talks about, when you have your milk production and you have a drop of milk production that lasts more than 4 days in a row, it will impact your reproductive performance. So I guess farmers have a daily docket or a daily measure of how much milk they're producing. So when things change, they should be aware that that's likely going to be affecting their reproductive performance as well. Then the question is, what can you do at the time that's already happening? But it's just being mindful. And in general, that change happens in every herd, every time, around the same time every year. So there is somewhat a repeatability of patterns that happens there, and farmers ensuring that they do meet body condition score targets at calving, that they don't lose much body condition score between calving and mating will help the cows navigate those shortages of energy a little bit better, and things better.
No, 100%. And Dave, I'm going to come back to you in a moment just around the milk curve, because you might have some comments to follow up on that. Just to pick up on George's question, just around the seeders and the result from the seeders, and perhaps in addition to that, do you do things like using sex semen, and there are other management components that you play around with?
Yeah, so in terms of the seeders, I can't quantify it off the top of my head. Sorry, George. But yeah, like we've sort of said as well, we've sort of really analysed everything that we've done, and nothing's really completely jumped out at us as to not really working, I guess. That we've had fairly good success with seeders in the past. Since having the once a day herd, we've found that we use very few of them now than we used to. We also get our own vets to sort of palpate anything as well, and give us an indication on how well set up they think they are, and whether they actually need the seeder or not. And I remember back to the feedback back then was, everything, the cows felt very good and were well set up. So everything sort of, we sort of felt like we ticked all the boxes there. And yeah, I guess other things, we did use a bit of sex semen this year. That's I guess the conception rate from those straws weren't a lot different to anything else. However, going forward, we might probably drop that out for a year or two, just I guess purely from the fact that we don't need anything else influencing our conception rate right now while we're trying to get that herd repro back up to where we want it.
Yeah.
I guess going forward this year, I'll do everything the same with my once a day system, try and get that transition right. We will be going back to bulls this year, and I guess it's not because of our repro results, but we're just going to go back to bulls and see how that goes. And that's probably all will change, really, just to have a real close eye on our feeding. And going back to the milk curve, I guess, like I do remember it being very challenging, being an early calving herd here, just dealing with some of those weather patterns that we got thrown at us. So the milk curve was up and down a little bit, but nothing too out of the ordinary. And I guess it sort of shows with the submission rates and all that as well. We're still getting good numbers cycling. They were strong heats every 21 to 24 days. And so it did give us a lot of confidence heading into that mating, but we just couldn't get it to stick.
Yeah. And look, that's, I guess, there are probably people tuning in hoping that there was going to be a bit of a magic answer here from you, Dave and Jair, but as is often the case with Repro, there's always an element of unknown, which I guess is a little bit frustrating. But I'm just conscious of time. Do want to wrap it up. I could carry this conversation on for ages because it's bloody fascinating topic. Jair, if you were to sort of finish with one or two key messages, just to sort of leave people with, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess it's the body conscious score targets at calving. They are key elements, and I think if farmers are not managing the rising 3-year-olds, the 2-year-olds, any different to the rest of the herd, it's a very high possibility that they're underdoing them. So the following body conscious score, drying off guides that DMZ supplies and all of that is very important. I think it's a very important thing. And I guess once you get into the new season, is be mindful, watchful of what's happening, the changes in production that's going on, and be proactive. Dave didn't see it coming because all his signs were positive, but the region itself had lower submission rates. So if you have lower submission rates, you can foresee that something is not quite right, and that things are going to be worse than what they were in the previous seasons.
Yeah, that's something you can see at the time.
Very early on. If you do pre-mating heat, you have an early sign. By the time you look at your submission rates, you have a second sign and a second measure, I guess, and it gives you the ability to make decisions as to whether you're going to intervene in some way, shape, or form with the herd.
Yeah, no, 100%. Dave, a word from you. Any sort of points that you want to leave farmers with?
I think it's just important that we all try and just do everything we can, to set those cows up for that mating period. I mean, even being a System 5 farm, I've been surprised with how well our cows have dealt with the once a day system, and how historically that has really improved our repro results. So that's something to sort of look outside the box with a little bit, I guess, for people who haven't looked at it. But also just acknowledge that sometimes we can't pinpoint, what's gone on and what's gone wrong. Like I said, we felt like we threw the kitchen sink at them, and obviously didn't end up with the result that we would have liked. And I know there's a lot of farmers out there that are in the same boat. So I guess it's just about making sure we can tick all the boxes as best we can with the condition score targets and that management leading into mating, and that's the best that we can do. And just try and work with that information that we've got and do things a bit better next season.
Cool. And look, I guess the final point from me is for farmers, I'd encourage them not to jump to a single solution without kind of looking into the data. And that's probably one thing with yours, Dave, is you've actually pulled the data out. You've kind of interrogated that information, to kind of work out a bit of a plan or any kind of refining. So, you haven't just jumped to, I'm going to just do this differently, but actually it doesn't address the problem. So you kind of want to hone in. And I'd encourage farmers to use the advice that's out there. The likes of Jair, you've got a massive amount of data that you're able to use and reference and provide feedback for farmers. And I just think that's a massive resource to be able to use, and I encourage farmers to do that. So we're going to wrap it up. Look, really, thanks, Jair. You've got a massive amount of knowledge and data at your fingertips. It's phenomenal. We've kind of touched the surface of it today. I'm sure farmers can tune in to you directly and find out more. And Dave, really another thanks for putting yourself out there when things and making it's a little bit of vulnerability, if you like, and just recognizing that it is a challenging space to get right every year, even when you feel like you've absolutely nailed the job. So really appreciate that. And again, thanks to the listeners for tuning in, and keep an eye out for future Smash events. So thanks all, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.